In this video, I'm going to attempt and fail at making a small air filtration unit for my workshop. Even though this project is a complete failure, I thought I would still share the video with you because some of the stuff in it might still be of interest, and also I'm interested in hearing your views on why it failed. But if you click this video to find out how to make a small air filtration unit, you're probably going to be disappointed. To kick things off as an introduction, here's a clip of me a couple of weeks ago, naive and full of hope that this project might actually work. When I looked into solutions for improving the air quality in my shop, there seemed to be two options available to buy, and neither of them were right for me. The first was to buy an air filtration unit like the ones on screen now. These are available from various brands, and these seem pretty good, and the cost of them seems to range from between £150 and £400. I have a few problems with these though. Firstly, their size. I don't really have any wall space where I could mount it, and I don't really want to mount it on the ceiling either because I would just lose too much headroom. The other problem that I have with these machines is that they're designed to clean areas much larger than the size of my shop. The smallest unit I can find is designed to clean the air in spaces up to 113 cubic meters. Internally, my workshop measures 4.1 meters by 2.6 meters and 2.1 meters in height, and that works out at around 22 cubic meters. So I just don't need a unit as big and powerful as the ones available to buy to clean a shed of my size. The second option is to install an extractor fan to one of my walls, something like a normal bathroom extractor fan, and that would help to remove some of the dirty air from inside to outside. But the problem I have with that is that an extractor fan would also remove some of the heated air from inside my insulated workshop, and in the winter I really want to try and retain as much of that heat inside as possible to make working in here bearable. So instead, what I'm going to attempt to do is to try and make a small air filtration unit that won't get in the way while I'm working, something that's adequately powered instead of overpowered to clean the air in such a small space, something that adequately filters out those small and harmful dust particles, and also something that's easy to maintain and relatively quiet. To get started, I'd need a small fan and some filters. For the fan, I looked on Amazon and chose this one here. I chose this because firstly it's rated at 230 volts, which means I can just wire it up to a normal UK plug. It's a silent operating fan, so it should be nice and quiet. It also has good reviews on Amazon, and it was relatively cheap at about £33. For the filters, I decided it would be good to have something washable so that I don't have to replace them regularly. I can just clean them and reuse them. And it needed to be a HEPA filter to capture those smallest micron particles of dust. So I searched for washable HEPA filters on Amazon and found this pair of filters designed for a Dyson vacuum cleaner. These are roughly the same size as the extractor fan, slightly bigger actually, so they seem to be a good option. So I started by making the box for the extractor and filters to fit in. And originally when I thought that this project might work, I was planning to go into detail about how I made it and make some free plans for download so that others could make it too. But now I know that it doesn't work, there's obviously no point doing that, so instead I'm going to speed through the build quite quickly and show you how I tested it at the end of the video. After ripping the panels of the box, I assembled it with glue and nails. And then I marked up the size for the front panel, which would need a hole cut in it to accommodate the shaft for the back of the extractor fan. I found the centre, marked up a hole with the compass, and then cut it out with the jigsaw. The shaft had a small raised area, so I used a rasp to get it to fit. I secured the extractor to the front panel with some screws. Then I glued and nailed on the front panel. Next I measured up the filters and cut some panels to size that would fit inside the box to hold the filters in place. Again, I marked up appropriate sized holes and cut them out with the jigsaw, and they were glued and nailed in place too. Then I added some sealant to make the box as airtight as possible to try to direct the air through the filters rather than through any gaps in the box. I did the same for the second filter too. Next I could wire in the extractor. Then I added a plug so that I could test it worked okay. Now I knew the size I wanted the unit to be, I could mark it up and cut it to length on the bandsaw. Next I added some cleats to the box to hold the filters in place. Here I'm using hot glue for speed and wood glue for strength. The second filter was slightly smaller than the first, so I ripped some strips of pine to make up the difference inside the box so that the filter would be held in place tightly. These were fixed in the same way. I'd used some of this self-adhesive draft excluder foam to seal the lid of the box. I could just cut it to length, peel off the backing and stick it on. It didn't stick particularly well to the plywood edges though, so I came back with a bead of super glue just to make sure it was stuck properly. Next I clamped the lid onto the box to get a tight seal. I added some brass hinges on one side, and a couple of these brass case clips on the other. These worked well to cinch down the lid onto the box really tightly. I applied a bit more sealant on the inside, and then I gave the unit a coat of white primer and paint just to tidy it up a bit because it was made out of just a bunch of scraps that I had in the workshop. I used a couple of screws to attach it flush to the ceiling in the area of the workshop where I had the most headroom. I managed to fit the fan so that the logo was upside down, but that was easily rectified with a sticker. I ran the cable in some mini trunking and also used some cable clips to secure it. The first indication I had that this project wasn't going to be successful was when I held up a small piece of tissue to see how much air the fan was pulling. In the centre of the fan it seemed to pull okay, but on the outside not so much. To really put the unit to the test, I borrowed this air quality particle monitor from a friend. The first thing I did was to test the air as I entered the workshop for the first time in a few days, so I expected the particle readings to be low, and they were. The PM 2.5 reading was 24, these are particles less than 2.5 microns in diameter, and the PM 10 reading was 91, these are particles less than 10 microns in diameter. The first test I did was with the extraction system turned on and the air filtration unit turned off. I made a series of cuts on the table saw to hardwood, MDF, softwood and plywood, followed by 1 minute of sanding softwood at my bench sander. I thought that this would be a good way of generating both larger and smaller dust particles. I took a reading immediately after the cutting and sanding, and the readings had increased from 24 and 91 to 37 and 115. I then took readings every 2.5 minutes. After 15 minutes, the readings were almost as low as they were before I started the experiment, so 15 minutes seemed to me to be a good length for the rest of the tests. Overall, the PM 2.5 reading decreased by 24% over the course of the 15 minutes, and the PM 10 reading reduced by 19%. And these percentage reductions would be what I used to judge whether the air filtration unit worked or not. For the next test, this time I turned the air filtration unit on and repeated the same number of cuts to the same materials at the table saw, followed by the same amount of sanding to the softwood. This time the PM 2.5 reading reduced by 27%, which was slightly more than the previous test without the air filtration turned on, and the PM 10 reading reduced by 11%, which is slightly less than the previous experiment without the air filtration turned on. So this demonstrated that with the air filtration unit turned on, it made no noticeable difference. I thought I'd also try the same experiments again, but this time with dust extraction turned off. so that there'd be much more dust particles generated in the air to see if that made the experiment results any more noticeable. So again, I made the same number of cuts to the same materials, sanded for 1 minute, and took more readings for the next 15 minutes. And then I did the same experiment for a 4th time, this time with the extraction off and the air filtration on. I was surprised to find out how high the next series of readings were. When comparing the readings with dust extraction to those without dust extraction, you can see that there are around 300% more particles in the air on average when not using extraction in my workshop. So that proves how important it is to collect as much dust as possible at source. When comparing the tests with and without the air filtration unit turned on and no dust extraction over the course of the 15 minutes, the PM2.5 particles dropped by 52% with the unit off and 54% with the unit on, and PM10 particles dropped by 41% with the unit off and 40% with the unit on. So again, this proves that the air filtration unit had no noticeable effect on the number of dust particles in the air. So not a very successful project. I've lost about 7 or 8 hours of my time, about £40 in cash, and all I've got to show for it is a white box on my ceiling that does absolutely nothing. I was fairly confident that this would work, and that probably shows in the video by how far I went with it. I didn't know how effective it would be, but I thought it would at least do something. I have no idea why it does nothing. If anyone has any ideas or suggestions, I would love to hear them. Perhaps I'll experiment with this again in the future, but at the moment I'm thinking I'll probably cut my losses and just put this idea to bed. It wasn't a complete waste of time though. At least I got to play around with an air quality monitor, and I learned how effective my dust extraction system really is. So that's something at least, and I hope this video wasn't as much of a waste of your time as this project was of mine. Thanks for watching. I was fairly confident that this... Hello. We've got an intruder in the workshop. What are you doing? Look at his legs. Legs!